The following is a recording of our free webinar, Veggie Remix, featuring Niki Jabbour, which took place on October 19th, 2023. Our presentation will begin with a brief introduction of our presenter. Niki Jabbour is the award-winning author of The Year-Round Vegetable Gardener, Groundbreaking Food Gardens, Niki Jabbour's Veggie Garden Remix, and Growing Undercover. She is a rare two-time winner of the prestigious American Horticultural Society Book Award and a three-time winner of a Gold Award for the Association for Garden Communicators. She's an in-demand speaker, for sure, a longtime radio host, and a good friend of ours.
I'm excited to be here. You know how much I love Johnny's and how much I love talking about gardening.
Well, let's get things started. I know you have a lot to cover, so I will get out of the way once you have your slides up, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, there we go. Slides are up. I'm so excited to be
Perfect.
here. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm looking really forward to this talk and hearing your questions afterwards. And of course, I want to send a big thank you out to Johnny Selected Seeds, in particular Joshua and Liv, who have been working very hard to make this happen. And I certainly appreciate all their hard work. And I've got a lot to cover, so I think that we should just get started. So, I think I should start with a confession. I was a really fussy eater as a kid. I didn't like very many vegetables. I'm sure it was very difficult for my parents because there were so few things that I liked to eat. Probably pretty common with little kids, I guess. But for me, that really changed once we had a vegetable garden. Knowing we're growing our own food and tasting some of these vegetables, the beans and the tomatoes and the cucumbers and all these foods that grew in our garden, it showed me how much better vegetables tasted when they were so fresh. And that really clicked in my head. And I've never looked back. Obviously, I've gone down the road of growing my own food for many years. And so to me, it's become very important. But really, I then took another step about 15 years ago when I started to explore so many different types of unusual vegetables and varieties. And that started because of a visit from my mother in law. So one August day, she came over to our garden. Most of my food garden is in the backyard. I have 30 raised beds at this point, as well as a 14 by 24-foot polytunnel, assorted cold frames, and lots of containers on my back deck. But she came over to pick some vegetables. It was again late August, so there was tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini and so many different types of crops. But when she walked into the garden, you walk under this trellis, right ahead there was this big trellis, vertical trellis that I'd had, and it was covered in the vigorous vines of a snake gourd. And for me, I was growing snake gourds because I thought they were pretty cool. It's fun to grow some of these unique hard shell gourds, speckled swans, snake gourds, apple gourds. At that time, I was growing lots of them for the kids because I would go to their schools and show all the classes, the different types of gourds, and it was really fun. And then, of course, once you can use them for autumn decor, and once that's over, you can let them dry completely and use them for crafting. So that's why I was growing snake gourds. But my mother-in-law, as she walked into the garden and saw the snake gourds, and at this point, the vines were quite vigorous and rampant, but the fruits were still quite immature, maybe 10, 12 inches in length. She told me that this was a vegetable she used to enjoy in Lebanon, where she grew up and even where my husband grew up. And it was called kukuza. Now, I was like, no, this is snake gourd. It's not edible. But she pointed out that indeed it was edible. And so we picked a bunch for her. She took them home. And the next day, we tried a bunch of the dishes that she had made from them. There was, stuffed kukuza. There was some roasted and barbecued. It was incorporated into other dishes. It was delicious. And that sort of got me thinking then, what other maybe vegetables could I grow here that she would recognize from her youth in Lebanon and maybe that were familiar to her that, again, weren't available in Canada? So I kind of went down the road where I wanted to grow lots of different vegetables. And of course, my in laws were very helpful, suggesting many they wanted me to try to grow, but they warned me that really you couldn't grow them in Canada. They said, we tried when we first came here, it didn't work, none of them would grow. Now, listen, when you're going to tell me I can't grow something, that's going to make me want to grow it very much. So I certainly became quite determined to grow some of these vegetables. And a couple years ago, actually, we got to go and visit the village, the Hamdoun, where my husband and his parents and family grew up in Lebanon. It's perched on the mountains overlooking Beirut and the sea. And as you can see, it's a very different climate from the one that I garden here in the maritime east coast of Canada. But, it was incredibly beautiful. And what was so interesting too is like the village is surrounded by ancient terraces, still often filled with plants like apricots and olive trees, many of them long gone and just empty terraces now. But you could see where that land had been worked for so long. And I had the opportunity as well to talk to many gardeners, market gardeners and home gardeners there, and see, what they like to grow, and maybe even get some growing tips that I could take back to my garden in Canada. But as I mentioned, as you can see, my garden is quite a different climate. Here in Nova Scotia, the winters are long, although not nearly as snowy as they were 30, 40 years ago. Pretty common, I think, at this point. We do get a lot of rain generally, and this summer has not been an exception. Uh, I think March, April, May were pretty dry, but then from June until, well, this weekend, it's been very, very wet. So there's been flooding, the rain's been nonstop. So it's been quite challenging that way in terms of growing this year. But as you can see, yeah, my garden is much different. But as I had so many successes with so many of the vegetables I wanted to grow for my in laws, it kind of got me thinking, well, I also love Japanese food. I love Indian food. I love food from South America. What other crops, vegetables, herbs, plants are people growing there that maybe I can't, get in Canada? I can't find at my grocery store. I can't get from my local seed company. What can I grow maybe that would thrive in my garden? So that sent me down a bit of a global vegetable garden rabbit hole, and one that I haven't really emerged from because I'm still always on the lookout for new, unusual, and delicious global vegetables to try in my garden. Like most gardeners, it's fun to try new things. I love it. And of course, every year I'm adding a couple new crops to the garden. Some become family favorites. Some, I just grow from time to time. But it's a really fun way to explore the world through your garden. So let's look at some of these vegetables. I'm going to start with some of the different ones that I've enjoyed. So the approach that I'm going to take is that I'm going to say, well, if you like tomatoes, for example, or if you like lettuce, then here are some crops that are very similar, maybe in flavor and texture to those crops, so that giving you suggestions of ones that you already like to eat. So let's start with a very popular vegetable, the cucumber. So if you like cucumbers, here are a few suggestions of ones you might want to try. So as you can see from this photo, this is sort of a very common midsummer harvest in terms of cucumber-like vegetables. You've got cucumbers like hitachi, as well as quirk. I'd probably grow anywhere from 15 to 20 different varieties of cucumbers a year. I do blame Johnny's in part for that because there's so many outstanding varieties I want to try. But I also grow cucumber-like vegetables such as cucamelons and cucumber melons, which I will talk about. But let's start with cucamelons because this has been a very popular crop the past decade. About 12 years ago, I gave a talk at the Northwest Flower and Garden Show in Seattle, and there were about 400 or 500 people in the audience. And I asked them, I said, how many people here have grown cucamelons? And like two people put up their hands, and then I was back a couple of years later for another book tour, and I asked the same question, how many people here are growing cucamelons? And, maybe 20 or 30 people put up their hand. And the last time I was there, which was 7 or 8 years ago now, I asked the question again because that book was focused on some of these unusual vegetables, Veggie Garden Remix. I said, how many people here, are growing cucamelons? And over 100 people put up their hand. So in the past decade, this unique little quirky vegetable has certainly become very popular in home gardens. So this is a cucumber relative. As you can see, they are quite small. They're also called Mexican sour gherkins. And the sour comes from the fact that they do have a bit of a tangy, citrusy, lime-like flavor, a bit of a sour flavor, which is more pronounced as they mature. So if you're looking for quite a citrusy cucamelon, you're going to find one like this that's more mature than, say, a littler guy, like this one. So if you don't love the citrus tang, then you can pick them when they're a little more immature. But again, plants are very prolific. I did just pick these about 20 minutes ago. So I wish I could share them with you all right now to try them if you haven't yet. But it's a very vigorous crop, but it's a heat-loving crop. It's not one that really gets started until the temperature rises, in early summer. So I do start the seeds indoors in late April. They go in the garden in late May, early June, about a week or two after the last frost day. And then they really start to produce in mid-August until, well, today, since I'm still harvesting them. We are still frostless here in my part of Nova Scotia. And they're a great crop to grow. Some people call them most melons because they're the size of a Barbie watermelon, I guess. And they do look like a watermelon, but the flavor definitely is cucumber with that little hint or twist of lime. So definitely worth growing, something really fun and interesting if you like cucumbers. Another one which ties this back to Lebanon again is the cucumber melon. Because when I asked my in-laws, what kind of vegetables did they want me to try from Lebanon, the number one answer was cucumber melon. This is what we want you to try. It's called mekti, which is a type of cucumber melon. Also Armenian cucumber, striped Armenian. That's this one here in the photo, striped Armenian. Just a simply outstanding variety that has these dark green and light green stripes. These are very long, slender fruits. If you grow them on the ground, they'll twist into fun little shapes like this. Some people do call them snake cucumbers for obvious reasons. But if you trellis them, which is how I grow them, they will grow nice and straight. And they're very interesting in that they should be picked immature. They will get the size of a baseball bat, like a zucchini, but you want to pick them when they're quite young, anywhere from say 6 to 10 inches in length. And these are not cucumber, although the flavor is very cucumbery. It's almost like a mildly sweet cucumber. These are botanically melons. And many gardeners are familiar with, Armenian cucumbers, but not so much with some of the other types of cucumber melons, because there's actually quite a few you can grow. So if you go to the market in Lebanon, this is sort of what you'll see here. Typical, there's fruits like apricots, there's lots of tomatoes always. And then there's these, mekti cucumber melons here in the foreground. And again, this is the proper size for harvesting them. Now, when you first pick them, you'll notice they're pretty fuzzy. And as you can see here, they're looking a little fuzzy as well. So the bottom one here is the one that I grow for my family. This green mekti or cucumber melon, as well as the striped Armenian, very popular. But there's also other types you can grow. There's dark green ones. There's Italian cucumber melons or caracello melons, which are the top ones. And I have to say, these are delicious plants, delicious fruits, I should say, but they are not nearly as productive as Armenian or striped Armenian cucumbers. They have fun shapes. Some are oval, some are more elongated, some are like a little quite squat, like the one on the right-hand side. And they are delicious, but the plants are modestly productive. And the harvest window is a much shorter period of time, maybe 6 weeks versus Armenian cucumbers, where I just picked the last one last weekend. So, they go for a much longer period of time. And you might also think, well, as a melon, if you're a short season gardener, maybe these are just not going to thrive for you. But most of these are very quick to crop. So not only do I transplant seedlings in late May, I also direct sow in early July. And that is the crop that I've just finished harvesting. So they really do go from seed to harvest in about 60 to 70 days, depending on which one you're growing. So this is a mekti, a Lebanese cucumber melon, about 3 days after pollination. As you can see, it's fuzzy, but it does lose most of that fuzz as it grows. We don't peel these when we eat them. We just slice them up, although they're also pickled, and absolutely delicious when they're pickled as well. And here is one about 10 days after pollination. And this is the size I would pick it at. My mother-in-law would tell you it's a little too big, but I think this is the perfect size, as is the one below it as well. And as you can see, they're not nearly as fuzzy anymore. They're just delicious. So this is a fun crop. If you've never tried growing cucumber melons, I recommend starting with striped Armenian because it's such a vigorous, early yielding, delicious variety to grow. And these are never bitter because they're not cucumbers, they're melons. So definitely something I think everybody should try. But if you do love cucumbers, I do have some suggestions of other outstanding varieties you might want to try. This is a global cucumber variety, Soyu Long. Absolutely outstanding in every way. This is a Chinese variety. The fruits grow up to 15 inches long. Yet, as you can see, they're very slender, about an inch to an inch and a half when you harvest them. They're also a little prickly, but I just kind of rub them with a tea towel to get rid of the prickles, and then we eat them. And they don't need to be peeled. They've got almost a slightly sweet cucumber flavor as well, never bitter. And if you grow them on the ground, they will curl around like a snake. But if you grow them on trellises, they will grow straight. So this is a really outstanding cucumber variety if you're looking for a new one to add to your garden next year. Another one that I really enjoyed this year is sashimi. So here is a little vignette from my garden in midsummer. This is a really early one as well, about 50, maybe 55 days from seed to harvest. As you can see, it has beautiful dark green, very glossy, smooth skin, very disease resistant plants. Even when I had some powdery mildew in parts of the garden, these leaves were not touched. They just looked beautiful up until about a week ago when we had some very cool nights. Not quite frost, but cool. So I cleaned these plants up yesterday. But they produced for a very long period of time. They also produce only female flowers. So every bloom that opens, you're going to get a fruit from. So very productive plants. Again, disease resistant, excellent flavor, never bitter. And that skin is quite thin as well, so you don't have to peel them if you aren't super partial to cucumber skin. So I'd highly recommend sashimi as well. Great variety to grow. Lemon cucumber. So this has been a favorite in my family for over 30 years. I got the seed probably when I was maybe 15 for the first time. And I was just starting to take over the family vegetable garden and try different varieties. And I was just kind of flexing my green thumbs. And I heard of a cucumber that was round, and I thought that sounds cool. So lemon cucumber came in the mail, and I planted those seeds, and I've been growing it ever since. It's still such a favorite variety in our family. So this is what it should look like when you harvest: pale green, very, very light yellow. It's got little black spines on it, which, rub off very easily. You can eat it like an apple. You can slice it up as a normal cucumber. Great flavor. They're really never bitter. The plants are very productive. It's an heirloom variety as well. So you can save the seeds. And this is what they'll look like when you save the seeds. See, this is where they get their name from, lemon cucumber, from their shape, but also from the fact they do take on this yellowish hue. So this is not really a great stage for eating. You can see it's kind of that dark gold, almost brownish color. So this is the seed saving stage. And as in the photo, of course, you can see this is the eating stage. But a great variety, and my introduction really into heirloom vegetables, as well as really unusual varieties as well. There's also another one similar called crystal apple, but lemon cucumber is definitely my preferred variety. All right, well, let's move into some leafy greens. Lettuce being the most popular green grown in gardens. So let's talk a little bit about different lettuce-like crops. So if you like lettuce, I have some suggestions of what you might want to grow. And I'll tell you why you might want to prefer them to lettuce. So Tokyo bacana, this is a green I have been growing for a long time. It is a loose leaf Chinese cabbage. It's a beautiful vegetable. It's got sort of buttery yellow leaves, as you can see, very wavy, just lovely plant, gorgeous, great in a container, great in a cold frame, great in a raised garden bed or an in-ground garden. And it's very cold tolerant. So it's great to plant in, very early spring in a structure or, some sort of protection. It's great in autumn. It's great all throughout winter, laughs off the cold, even when it becomes like very cold, well below zero, like minus 20 in my polytunnel. I'm still harvesting Tokyo bacana. That's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. Although I think when you get that cold, it's pretty much the same thing. I usually direct seed it, but you can also start them indoors. You can harvest it as a baby crop or full grown plants. And the great thing about Tokyo bacana is because not only is it very cold tolerant, but because it's a member of the brassica family, it actually has more than one edible part. So as you can see in the photo, if you look in the top left-hand side there, there's a little bit of yellow flowers. So like other cabbage family vegetables, it produces these broccoli-like flower buds, which you can harvest and eat like broccoli, raw, sautéed, steamed, however you like it, or you can let them open. And in this photo, they've just opened, and you can eat them as an edible flower, or again, you can still cook them this way, or you can just let them flower and provide nectar and pollen in early spring for the early pollinators. So it's a great plant to grow, and again, has a really nice lettucey texture. But you can even use it for wraps instead of like bread and sandwiches and such as like as that as well, or even as like a fresh egg roll or wrapper as well. So good if you want different dishes like that. Mizuna. Mizuna is another outstanding Asian green. I've been growing this probably for 30 years. It has a great mild flavor, a little hint of mustard flavor, but nothing like the mustard greens themselves. So Mizuna is a nice sort of gateway to growing some of these spicier greens because it does have such a lovely mild flavor. It's also a beautiful plant, and there's different types. Some are purple and some are green, but they have these lovely feathery serrated leaves. They add loft and texture to your salads, a nice little bit of crunch. Again, because this is also a Chinese cabbage in the Chinese cabbage family, they will also produce edible flower buds you can eat, as well as edible flowers. Very fast growing, but a month from seed to harvest for baby greens, another 10 days or so till you get some larger size greens like these. And it's also very cold tolerant, so it's great in the cold frame in early spring. You can jumpstart your spring garden by planting this, enjoying it now in late autumn, as well as even into winter if you have a protected structure like a greenhouse or a dome or a polytunnel, or even just a cold frame to protect it. Mosh, this is Vite. Mosh is just one of those ridiculously hardy vegetables. So if I had to pick, perhaps the most cold hardy vegetable, it would kind of be in the running, I think, between mosh and Zucchini Savoy and maybe tatsoi, because these are just so hardy. The first year I grew mosh, I had grown most of it in a cold frame, but some of the seeds were outside the cold frame and the little plants had sprouted. And so that year was a heavy snow year. This is about 18, 19 years ago. And we had probably 2 feet of snow for most of the winter. So by the time the snows retreated, it was May. And I thought I didn't even think that there'd be anything left underneath the snow. But there was the mosh, perfect as the day it went under the snow, ready to be harvested, fresh and delicious and tender and buttery. Such a great green. So you can see it grows in a rosette, which is about 2 to 4 inches across, depending when you're harvesting them. And we harvest mosh by cutting it off at the soil surface with a little serrated knife. And we don't separate the clusters into leaves. We just I rinse them off clean, and then I toss them with a bit of olive oil and lemon juice and a little bit of salt. And they're just so delicious. It has such a wonderful texture and a very almost nutty, mild flavor that's so good. It's also called corn salad or lamb's lettuce. And it's grown a lot in Europe, but it's a great green. It does, however, if you let it reseed, if you let a few plants go to seed, it gets a little promiscuous in the garden. It gets everywhere, but I don't complain because you can keep harvesting them. So if they end up in my pathways, I'll just eat them. If they go into another bed, well, we will just eat them. So I don't mind that aspect of mosh. There was one year I didn't get a chance to plant more, but I noticed one of my plants had gone to seed, so I picked it up and I carried it over to one of my cold frames and just kind of shook it in a cold frame. And about 2 months later, we had a cold frame full of mosh leaves, pretty densely planted. I probably should have thinned them out a bit, but we did that by eating them. But as you can see, it is very, very cold tolerant. Does not mind at all that it's in a cold frame in the middle of winter, in the middle of a snowstorm, beneath a very, very thick blanket of snow. So mosh is definitely one of those outstanding greens that you might want to consider adding to your garden. Purslane. Now, a lot of people see purslane and they just think it's a weed. And I get it. I do have a little bit in my garden from time to time, but we just eat it. I don't mind the weedy purslane. It kind of grows low to the ground, small little spoon shaped leaves, like a little mat. But this is not wild purslane. This is not the weedy version. This is a cultivated version. And as you can see, the plants are larger, the leaves are larger. These grow about 8 to 10 inches tall, and the largest leaves will be about maybe an inch, inch and a half long. They are also spoon shaped. Has a nice succulent sort of texture to the leaves. It's beautiful in a salad. So this is a Lebanese vegetable as well, in that it is very popular in Lebanon, particularly for salads like fattoush, a bread salad with lots of greens and tomatoes and cucumbers or cucumber melons. And just delicious with also fresh za'atar in it. So purslane, easy to grow, very fast to grow as well. And what's nice about it is that when lettuce doesn't often thrive in the heat of summer, the purslane is still going strong. It doesn't mind the hot temperatures. It's also fairly drought tolerant as well. So it's not a fussy crop that you have to always be paying a lot of attention to. And then you can harvest it very hard, cutting the plants back to about 2 inches, just shearing them back, and they will grow all these fresh stems for you. So you can have cut and come again harvest time after time after time. And then if you do let a few go to seed, you can see here, this is me holding them in my sweater. You can see there's a few yellow flowers there. If I let them go to seed, they will reseed in the garden and pop up again the next year. I prefer to plant them that way I can, follow my crop rotation and such. But if some do pop up, you can just harvest them and eat them, or dig them up and move them to the better spot in the garden. But yeah, purslane is a great plant to grow, and this is Goldsberg Golden, an outstanding variety with these beautiful golden green leaves, incredible vigorous growth, and again, just a great mild flavor. So highly recommend if you enjoy your fresh salads. Salanova lettuce. So this has been my go-to lettuce now for about 5 years at least. It's heat tolerant, it's cold tolerant. There's lots of beautiful types to grow. It's fast growing. The heads are packed with leaves, like at least twice as many leaves as your normal head of lettuce. So even though the heads might be quite compact, there's so much lettuce packed into those layers. It's delicious. It thrives so well. It's very vigorous plants. And I grow them throughout the year. There's pretty never a time in the garden I don't have Salanova lettuces of some sort. Right now, I was up there a little while ago, just in one of my cold frames where there's some Salanova. I probably have 200 heads in the garden at the moment. This photo was just taken last weekend of the red and green and size lettuces in the garden. The Salanovas, again, so beautiful. Some of these are 10, 12 inches across, packed with leaves. And I just harvest them by cutting them at the soil level. And it's just everybody's favorite salad at this point. And it's so much fun to mix and match the different varieties to give you lots of different textures and colors in your salads. So definitely my go-to lettuces at this point. And just to show you how cold tolerant Salanova lettuces can be, here is a little video from last winter. Kept the sound on so you could hear the storm. So you peek underneath in late January. There's a little bit of arugula. There's some red and green butter lettuces in there. Again, still growing strong with nothing more than a very thin layer of the plastic polyethylene to protect them with the little hoops from the the extreme weather. So this is just a great variety to grow. And again, they establish very quickly. I do start them indoors, so I don't direct sow Salanova lettuces. The seeds are typically pelleted. So I start them inside in little cubes of soil that I make with my little soil cubes, and then I plant them out in the garden. And again, it doesn't take very long for them to go from transplant to harvestable size. So definitely a great lettuce to grow if you love your lettuces. And maybe you want to take a little walk on the wild side and try something that offers a little more peppery punch, a little mustardy flavor. While there's no shortage of great greens that do definitely add more flavor to your salads and other dishes. For example, Amara is a beautiful mustard. As you can see, it has these sort of dark green, bluish green leaves that are scalloped along the edges. These are both, of course, at a baby stage here in this photo, but they will get quite large, of course. You can use these to eat stir fry, to eat in salads as a baby green. You can enjoy them steamed or sautéed. So many ways to enjoy some of these mustards. Ms. America is another like incredibly beautiful plant. It's almost too pretty to eat because those leaves, those burgundy purple leaves with the serrations on the sides, they just stand out when you have a salad. Or pile them on top of your sandwiches or stir fry them as well. Both of these pack a mild to medium type heat, which definitely increases as they mature. So if you don't want too much of that, mustardy flavor, harvest them when they're small. If you enjoy that little punch, then just wait until they grow a little bit more mature and harvest them then. But again, easy to grow. These are perfect for planting. I usually seed them in early to mid September for October, November, December. Well, they go all the way through winter. They're just that winter hardy when given protection. And of course, you can start them in the garden very early. So I would be seeding these in a cold frame in like March. As soon as we have more than 10 hours of day length, I will be seeding these in my greenhouse, like my polytunnel, as well as my cold frames. So cold tolerant, ideal for spring, autumn, or winter harvesting. Red Giant is a beautiful mustard. So this one does definitely pack more of that mustard flavor. So if you like that intense mustardy flavor, I highly recommend trying Red Giant. Of course, all of these can also be eaten as microgreens, but also baby crops or mature leaves. So this is a mature plant here. It's kind of hard to tell, but it was about a foot tall at this point. The leaves are large and paddle shaped. They have that lovely scalloped edge. They've got a nice green color with that purpley burgundy coloring on top of the green that's just so pretty. Again, as a baby green, that's when it would pack less of that mustard flavor. But if you really want the intense mustard flavor, let them mature and then you can eat them when they get to be this size. You can eat them raw, of course, or you can steam them, saute them, stir fry them, however you enjoy your mustard greens. But this is a beautiful one. It's productive and it really goes for a long time in the garden. Tomatoes. Well, tomatoes are definitely the top crop grown in home gardens. Everybody loves their tomatoes. I was still picking a few in the garden right now, but for the most part, I've started to clean up my plants because even though we're frost free, the day length has definitely shrunk, and the nighttime has been cool, so the plants have been on the decline for sure. But if you like tomatoes, I do have some suggestions of tomato-like crops, some relatives you might want to try in your garden. The first one, of course, would be ground cherries, one of my favorite vegetables to grow. And even though it's not a Lebanese vegetable at all, it is one that my mother-in-law is obsessed with. When I introduced her to ground cherries about a decade ago, she's just her mind was blown. She couldn't believe something was so sweet and delicious because I like a fully ripe ground cherry has a flavor that I would describe as maybe like pineapple, a little vanilla, a hint of cherry tomato in there as well, and sometimes even a little bit of butterscotch. So yum, so delicious. And ground cherries are great. I mean, you can make them into pies, you can add them to muffins and loaves, of course. You can make them into jams and sauces, which is one of my favorite ways to have them. I make a ground cherry and vanilla jam, which is so good. And I just freeze the jars at the bottom of the freezer. underneath everything that nobody so that nobody in the family will see them and I can save them for myself. But you can also dehydrate them in your dehydrator, like raisins, and then use those in like granolas and such as well, in your oatmeal. So ground cherries, definitely a crop that keeps on giving. My big issue with ground cherries is I'm competing with squirrels and chipmunks for them. So I have to use a garden cover over top them to keep those little critters away. I just cover them with like mini hoops and some bird netting or chicken wire, and that does the trick. But this is a great plant to grow. They get about 2 to 4 feet tall and wide, and you want to generally harvest them as they fall to the ground. Ground cherries. So that's when I pick them. And at that point they're generally golden in color. But if they're still green, that's okay. I just lay them on the counter, and within a couple days they'll turn that beautiful golden color. You can then store them in the fridge for a couple weeks. You can freeze them, but I prefer to make something out of them, either jam or dehydrate them or bake them into baked goods. So this is Goldie. This is pre-husking and this is post-husking. So they do have this papery little husk that looks like a little lantern. And I should have actually picked one. One thing I didn't think to pick. They're about maybe an inch, the size of a small marble, really. And again, just so delicious. It's sort of like, okay, one for the pot for making jam, one for me, one for the pot, one for me. So good. And my mother-in-law, let me tell you, this is again, she's a Lebanese grandmother. So her mission in life is to feed people. But when I bring down ground cherries for her, she hides them. She's a ground cherry hoarder, and she doesn't let anybody else have any. So it's definitely fun to see how this vegetable has become one of her favorite things to eat. And if you've not seen ground cherries, I just thought I'd give you an example of what they look like, the color and the size in relation to my hands when you harvest them. Yeah, and the crows in the background. Anybody see the plant behind it? You recognize that one? If you see it at the top right hand side, you'll see like a little immature fruit with a little flower. That's cucamelons. Talked about earlier, little cucamelon plants there behind the ground cherries. All right, so that is ground cherries. Another tomato relative would be tomatillos. So these kind of have like a fruity tart flavor. There's different varieties you can grow. They come in different colors. The plants get 3 to 4 feet tall. They should be staked because I do find the branches can be brittle. We get a lot of nor'easters and hurricanes and heavy winds. So if I don't stake my tomatillos, I definitely know those branches are going to break. Particularly when the fruits start to get heavy, the branches will go down and then they'll snap. And you don't want that because then the fruits will not fill out and mature. These are also, as you can see, produced in a papery husk. So you want to make sure you support the plants with caging or some sort of staking system. But I got to say, this is a great plant to grow. You do, however, need two. So tomatillos need two plants to ensure cross pollination. Ground cherries, even though they look the same, smaller, of course, you can get away with one plant. So if you have a small space, you're growing in a container, you can plant one ground cherry. Tomatillos, again, two. If you have one, you're going to get very few, if any, fruits. So make sure you have two tomatillos. Easy to grow from seed, just like a tomato. I start them at the exact same time as well. And the plants are beautiful. They're beautiful in the garden and they're very bee friendly. The bees love the tomatillo plants. You can see the gorgeous yellow and black flowers here in the garden. There's always native bumblebees just pollinating these plants and doing a great job. And then, of course, as the flowers turn to fruits, you get these lovely, large, balloon-like papery husks that develop. And then inside, there's a teeny tiny fruit, which eventually grows big enough to split that papery husk open. And that's when you know they're ready to harvest. So, some plants, and here are three different varieties that are really great for growing. You've got Pancho, Toma Verde, and Damalipa. It's beautiful. I love the purple ones as well. They tend to ripen just a little bit later than the green ones. They're the last ones I start to harvest, but they make a beautiful salsa verde. So I usually roast these in the oven with, jalapenos and onions and garlic, and then I process them up in the food processor to make a really spicy, yummy salsa verde. And then I freeze it, so we have it all winter long in jars. Very easy to do. And this is Pancho. I mean, look at the size of these. And you can see I probably should have picked them just a little sooner because they really split their husks, but they're fine. The fruits themselves didn't split. They could be prone to splitting if you leave them in the garden too long and there's a really sudden influx of water, sort of like a tomato, but I find these do not split very easily at all. Poncho is a gorgeous variety. It's really productive, and the branching on it is quite thick and sturdy. So even though I do stake them, it's not quite as imperative as with some of the other varieties, especially the heirloom varieties I've grown where the branches are more brittle. And it also has a nice open sort of growth habit, open form. So it's not super upright, which is more again more prone to breaking in winds and bad weather. And the fruits themselves, huge, rounded, apple shaped, delicious, and make an outstanding salsa verde. So again, this is a good variety to grow if you want to try growing some tomatillas. Of course, you might just want to try some different tomatoes. And there's lots of amazing tomatoes you can grow. I mean, I could just make this a talk about tomatoes, but we have to talk about other vegetables as well. But this is sort of an example of some of the tomatoes I'll be pulling out of my garden at any time in the summer. And I already miss it. I still have tomatoes ripening, all around me, but I'm still already starting to mourn the loss of the garden tomatoes. Although my freezer is packed full of homemade tomato sauce for winter. Galahad, this has been my go-to red slicer for a couple years now, at least, probably 5 or 6 years. This is an All America Selections winner. The plants are ridiculously disease resistant. It's got lovely compact growth. Oh my gosh, the size of the fruits varies from medium to large. They're always delicious. Just fantastic variety. Super early, the earliest slicer really in the garden. I grow them in the garden. I grow them in the greenhouse. It doesn't matter. They thrive. Beautiful, beautiful plants. Makes great sauce. Delicious in sandwiches and salads. And again, very, very productive. Early, compact growth. Again, great variety to grow if you love a slicer. Green bee. Now, this is a very unique, unusual tomato on the left here, green bee. I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since I first grew it, but it's definitely earned a place in my garden, an annual place, because I love it. Not only they look like plums, I guess, sort of like golden green striped plums, but not only are they really delicious, they have almost like a tangy flavor. The texture is really different in terms of it being very crunchy, very crisp. They're also very long storage. If you have a cool basement, or a cool spot to store these, maybe 50, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, I'd store these for 2 months, and where we still harvest them down in my basement. I tie them up in trusses with a string from the ceiling, and we just keep enjoying them, almost until Christmas. The first year I grew them, we did eat them until Christmas, but then the second year we ate them before we finished the crop before Christmas. But they really do go that long. If you keep them just in room temperature, like your kitchen, you can get about 3 weeks from them. So unlike other tomatoes that will start to rot after maybe 4 or 5 days when they're ripe, these last for a very long time. Again, great flavor. They're really nice grilled or roasted because they maintain that shape, but they're also really good just eaten out of hand, sliced into salads, on sandwiches. They just have such a unique texture that I think once you try them, you'll really love them. The first year I grew them, it did take me a few tries to realize when I should harvest them. At first, I picked a few too early, and then I finally figured out the best time to harvest them, which again is when they're this beautiful, beautiful color and have this crisp texture. On the other side of this photo is Captain Lucky, which is the green tomato that with the beautiful red marbling in the middle. Also pineapple, Japanese black trifle, costoludo, which is a lovely Italian heirloom. But Captain Lucky has been a tomato I've been growing for quite a few years now. And I mean, look at the size of this guy. It's huge. You only need like one slab of it for your sandwich. Great in a salad, great on a tomato tart, roasted in the oven. It has such a wonderful, complex flavor. The plants get around 4.5 feet tall, so they're not like overwhelmingly tall. They're also quite productive. And again, I mean, this is the reason you're growing them for these gorgeous, gorgeous tomatoes that taste so delicious. Mochi, this is a new one for me of this year from Johnny's, and I am in love. I can easily say that. This is such a unique tomato as well, sort of, reminiscent of the one I just showed you, green bee. So this, as you can kind of see if you look closely, it's got a very thin skin. It's got a funny texture too. I give it a little squeeze. It's almost like a gumdrop type texture, and it's so delicious. It's not quite chewy. It's not the right word for it, but gumdrop I think is. It's such a flavor in your mouth. It's sweet. It's delicious. The plants are productive. They're so glossy. They just kind of shine. And you have to let them really ripen to a nice deep red color, and I mean they'll just blow you away. The plants were very productive. Here's an example of the trusses on mochi. I grew it in my greenhouse and I grew it in the garden. The greenhouse plants did do a little bit better, but the garden plants also certainly really surprised me. And we harvested a lot of these fruits. You can tell in this photo just how thin that skin is. So I highly recommend mochi to anybody who's interested in trying a new tomato for themselves next year. This was definitely with Sun Gold at the top of our cherry tomato taste test this year. So very, very interesting, unique texture and flavor. Highly recommend. Blush, another outstanding tomato. So beautiful. This is a large size cherry. You know, great sweet fruity flavor. The plants are very productive. You get hundreds of these beautiful tomatoes that are about an inch and a half long. It's lovely in that it's sort of gold with these pinky red stripes. Great in salads, or as I like to eat them, just out of the garden because that's what I'm doing when I'm out there. You can see, get a sense of the size of this tomato from this little video, and the coloration. It's just so pretty. Yeah, beautiful in salads. Radishes, well, there's lots of great radishes you can grow too in your garden. So if you love growing radishes, and I certainly do, and I feel like this is radish harvest season now, especially for all these winter type radishes, then here's a few suggestions for you. Watermelon radishes, a little bit unusual. A lot of people, when I grew up, we only grew spring radishes, you know, the little round sparkler white tip radishes. And now everybody is growing these wonderful winter radishes, like watermelon radish, also called red meat or beauty heart. These are, I mean, they look like a interesting radish. They're kind of whitish, pale green, and then you cut them open, and this is what they look like. It's just this hot pink interior color, sort of like a sweet, mildly spicy flavor. They're so good in kimchi. They're great in salads. You can roast them in the oven. I'm such a fan of these delicious, delicious watermelon radishes. Again, almost too pretty to eat when you slice them open. And this is, gives you an idea of some of the color range of these radishes. So I just kind of laid them out on top of a straw bale. I have the interior shot as well. Some are pure snow white, others are hot pink. You got purple streaks, you've got green. You really can grow the rainbow when it comes to radishes. So this is alpine, which is a really good variety to grow. You know, particularly if your soil isn't that deep or is clay based or is rocky. This is a good variety versus some of the longer Japanese types. You know, it's they're productive as you can see. They get about 2.5 inches across, 5 to 8 inches long. They have slightly green shoulders. This is great for kimchi. This is a Korean type and outstanding for kimchi. And I know that because I made kimchi last weekend and it's in my fridge. And I used alpine and I used cayenne bravo radishes for it. And it's beautiful kimchi as well as really, really good. This is green Lobo improved. So this is another one that's, you know, about the same length, 5 to 7 inches, a little bit more narrow, a little bit more of a green top to it. Great variety though, also for kimchi, for salads, for roasting, for fresh eating, however you like your winter radishes. This is really a great variety to grow and really quick to grow. Like, you know, these aren't long season radishes that need, you know, a lot of time in the garden. You know, we're talking 55 days or so for most of these types of radishes. So these are things that I'm planting usually early, mid to late August, and then we're enjoying into October, November, and sometimes even December, depending on the weather. Cayenne Bravo. So I took this video last weekend, right before I made kimchi, so you can get a sense of exactly how big these beautiful radishes are and what they look like indoors. The roots are about 4 to 6 inches long, 2 to 2.5 inches, almost 3 inches across. Beautiful coloration on the inside. Great flavor. It's like sweet with just a little bit of that radish flavor. Really good raw in salads and such, as well, of course, you know, as you can see, in kimchi. And of course, don't forget to eat the greens. Radish greens are delicious and they're so good for you. And so we do love to eat the tops of our radishes steamed or, of course, raw if I harvest them young like this in salads. So if you like summer squash, then I have some suggestions for you. So lots of different summer squash out there. But let's start with, well, I'll show you this video first, I guess, and I can actually show you in real life as well. I did just pick a few of these guys. I'll wait and tell you what they are in a few minutes. But there's a lot of beautiful summer squash varieties out there. So first, though, a summer squash-like vegetable, gourds. Some of these gourds I mentioned earlier, bottle gourds. This is bottle gourds here. Beautiful and productive, huge flowers. I do find it helpful to hand pollinate my gourds because we don't have the moths that do the night pollinating. You know, in India and the other countries, many of these gourds come from. So when I see a female flower, I will hand pollinate with a male flower. Snake gourds, and I did actually pick one of the little ones right now as well to show you. These can get, I mean, giant vegetable growers grow them like over 10 feet long, but you know, mine usually get anywhere from 4 to 6 feet long. This is the last one of the season, and it's just under 3 feet. but still pretty fun. I talked about snake gourds earlier on and how you can eat them when they're immature. So summer squash, this is Zephyr. So if you like summer squash, this is a variety I've been growing for a couple of years now. And I mean, here it is almost late October and I'm still harvesting summer squash. How amazing is that? These fruits are beautiful, they're slender, bicolored, they're often quite curved. The plants are ridiculously productive. They're also powdery mildew resistant, so highly recommend Zephyr as a summer squash variety. But there's so much variation in colors in summer squash, it's really hard to pick just one. Although, really, how many do you need? 8 ball and 1 ball summer squash, also very beautiful, fun little round ones, best picked when they're about 2 to 3 inches across. Lemon Sun, I love the patty pan types of summer squash. Also best picked when they're 2 to 3 inches across. You probably could let them go a little bit bigger, but they're going to have the best texture and flavor when they're immature. And Pantheon, gorgeous costata romanesca type zucchini. I love this variety. It has a slightly nutty flavor. It's just outstanding for grilled, baking, however you like to eat your zucchinis. The plants are really productive as well, and more productive than costata romanesca, and they're more uniform in shape, each fruit. So highly recommend this one as well. And they're just so pretty. Look at those stripes and the speckling on these fruits. Yeah, great variety. All right, we're almost ready to wrap up here. I just want to talk quickly about spinach. So if you like spinach, then I have some suggestions for you. I will talk about komatsuna in just a minute. But first, let me talk about the magic sparkle plant. So this is what my daughter used to call magenta spreen, the magic sparkle plant. It's a quinoa cousin. This is a great spinach substitution in that it's very heat tolerant. And we know spinach isn't. You can grow spinach in spring, in fall, and in winter. But in summer, no, it's a no-go. But this is where magenta spreen comes in. It's a beautiful plant. I shear it back every couple of weeks so that we have this fresh growth. And these delicious leaves can be used raw, like spinach in salads, or cooked, like in spinach artichoke dips. And even though my daughter is now 19, she did ask me this past spring if I'm still going to grow the magic sparkle plant. And of course I am. It's so much fun. They used to love to rub the little pink coloration on their cheeks. So just a delicious plant. And again, very heat tolerant, unlike spinach. And so is red leaf vegetable amaranth. This is a great plant. It's so beautiful. It's great in an ornamental container. You can add this to your flower gardens as well because it's so pretty. And it's also delicious, also called callaloo. It's a very productive plant with these beautiful roundish to heart-shaped bicolored leaves. Again, I shear it back a couple times over the growing season so we can keep enjoying fresh growth and therefore it keeps it from flowering as well. And again, heat tolerant, great for summer if you can't grow spinach in the summer. Also, types of amaranth, just to show you some of the different variations of amaranth. If you look in the very front there on the right-hand side of this photo, that would be Love Lies Bleeding, which is just a nice ornamental amaranth with those beautiful pendulous flowers. Actually, I think I picked a few behind me a little bit as well. This is the green version here. Elephant Head, another fun one. Kids call this the middle finger plant, and I don't need to explain why. But this is another ornamental type of amaranth that's very striking. Chard, oh my goodness, do I love Swiss chard. So my Lebanese mother-in-law makes a Lebanese dish called fatire, which is basically like a little pocket of dough filled with normally spinach and feta cheese, but she uses Swiss chard. So I use Swiss chard. So this is what I use a lot of my Swiss chard for, making fatire with sumac and onion and of course feta cheese and pine nuts, and then I bake them in a little pastry shell, and it is so delicious. And peppermint Swiss chard is one of my favorites to grow. It has really vigorous growth, but it's also very upright. So it really stands up, which is really nice. Extremely ornamental, electric white, and pink, hot pink, really. Petioles, very eye catching. It's just been my go to now for a couple of years. I love peppermint chard. I mean, look at that. It's gorgeous. And then, of course, a new variety that I've grown this year is Heart of Gold. It's a very intense gold, very productive again as well. Vigorous plants, upright growth, so they don't tend to sprawl in the garden. Extremely ornamental, and you can of course grow it for a baby crop or full-sized crop like this here, mature grains. Uh, Komatsuna, this is Carlton. Again, this is a great one for fall, for spring, for winter harvesting. It is also more heat tolerant than other varieties, so it will go into summer, standing longer in the garden. Large paddle-shaped leaves, really nice mild flavor, great as a spinach substitute. Tatsoi, Extremely cold hardy. This is one of those ridiculously cold hardy varieties, perfect for cold frames and greenhouses for winter harvesting. Just a great green and very much like a spinach substitute. Can eat it raw, of course, stir fried, cooked, however you like it. And ruby red auroch, my gosh, what an intense purpley burgundy color this is. Again, great raw or cooked. Really adds a lot of color when you're using it as as a spinach substitute in different dishes, whether it's pasta or dips. It's just like this beautiful pop of color in salads too, and very easy to grow. So this is a great one for summer because it's very heat tolerant. Again, unlike spinach. And the final one I'll show you is Syrian oregano, because in Lebanon, one of the most popular spice mixes is called za'atar, which is a mixture of Syrian oregano, sumac, sesame seeds, and salt. And you mix it all up together, and then you spread it with olive oil on top of like a pizza dough or a bread type dough, and you bake it in the oven to make something called a minushi. And minushi is just one of my favorite things to eat. It's a traditional Lebanese breakfast, but you can eat that any time of the day because it's just so delicious. And this is a minushi fresh out of my pizza oven. For again, the dried Syrian oregano, little sumac, toasted sesame seeds, salt, and you crack that up and you just enjoy it. And now I'm making myself hungry. But I hope, if anything, I've given you some ideas of maybe some new varieties or vegetables that you might want to try in your garden this year. There's just so much out there, and every year these wonderful seed companies like Johnny's are introducing new varieties that maybe offer improved disease resistance or production or other characteristics that we can use in our gardens to grow, more food, healthier food, and there's nothing like the homegrown harvest. So again, I hope I've offered you some ideas and you're kind of getting some thoughts of what you can grow next year. And again, big thank you to all of you for joining me today. Good luck on the giveaways. And also thank you so much to the amazing folks at Johnny Selected Seeds.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation, Nikki. I'm Liv, and I've been reading all the questions. So many questions, lots of enthusiasm. I thought maybe we could just start out. Could you just remind us your growing zone that you're in right now?
Sure. I am in zone 5B, Nova Scotia, east coast of Canada.
Thank you. Okay, so for the cucamelons, Armenian cukes, and sort of cucumber alternatives, we had some questions. One of them was, do they have the same pests and diseases that you might find with cucumbers, for example, like powdery mildew? Is that something you have to worry about?
Um, Not on cucamelons. I've never had any cucumber beetles. I've never had powdery mildew on cucamelons. I've never had cucumber beetles on, for example, my cucumber melons as well. I haven't had them attack those plants. I have seen a little bit of powdery mildew on some of the cucumber melons, but not until the very end of the season. And I find that it was worse on the Italian Carasolo type cucumber melons than the Lebanese type or the striped Armenian. So I would say the issues are lessened than you would find on an average cucumber variety.
Great, thanks. Another question, do you need to worry about cross-pollination between, for example, the cucamelons or cucumber melons and cucumbers if you have them all in your garden at once?
Yeah. No, in terms of cucamelons. So you're not going to get cross pollination between cucumbers and cucamelons, or cucumber melons and cucumbers, or cucumber melons and cucamelons. But within the cucumber melons, because I tend to grow 4 or 5 different types of cucumber melons each year, they will cross. They're musk melons, so they're not the same as cucumber. So the pollen is incompatible, but they certainly will cross pollinate within the cucumber melon. So if I'm growing some of the Italian ones, if I'm growing striped Armenian, if I'm growing the Lebanese type, then yes, they will all cross pollinate. So, which is why I recommend buying new seeds every year if you grow more than one type. But if you're just growing one type, then you're fine.
Great, thank you. Let's see, moving on to some questions about the actual cucumbers. There was a question about
Yeah,
sashimi. You had
yeah.
mentioned that it only produces female flowers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Some people were wondering, like, how does it produce fruit? Do you need to have another, like, a male plant, etc.?
Right. Yeah, because that's a good question, because cucumbers can be confusing that way for sure. Yes, so it is gynaeous as well as parthenocarpic. So it's a variety that only produces female flowers. So as it grows, you only see as the fruits and the flowers come out. Each female flower has the baby fruit underneath the petals, and you're only going to get those, no male flowers. So it does not need pollination to produce its fruits. Now, technically speaking, if you want these to be seedless fruits, you should be growing them in a greenhouse with insect screening so there's no pollination whatsoever. But I've grown them, as you could see, that was a video from my garden. So I grew them in the garden and my greenhouse, which is also open. The sides are open, so I get a lot of insects in there. So those fruits would develop some seeds inside them. Whereas if I was growing them in a completely in a greenhouse environment that with no insects, a closed environment, they would be seedless. But where I'm growing them in a garden or an open greenhouse, then they did have seed development, but not a lot of seeds. Nothing that would make it not a delicious variety to grow. We certainly loved it, and I picked them when they were at the right stage, not over mature. So they were fine. But if you wanted something perfectly seedless, you would have to grow that variety in a closed greenhouse.
Great, thanks. About the lemon cucumbers, we had a question on flavor. Could you give your thoughts
Mm.
on the flavor? Is there an actual lemony flavor to it?
I've been getting that question for 30 years. And same with peppermint Swiss chard. Does it taste like peppermint? Oh, I wish. No, it does not. No, there's no lemon flavor to lemon cucumbers, I'm afraid. I couldn't tell you where the name really came from. I can just assume. And I would assume that it came from the fact that it's sort of, well, I guess I can hold it up, that it's sort of like a lemony shape. And of course, as they mature, they get this lemony color. I don't know if that's going to focus on it, but there's the mature lemon cucumber there. And I mean, they do get a little bigger than this. This is an end of the season one, as you can see, but it gives you a sense of the size and the shape.
Great, sounds good. Let's see, moving on to Tokyo Bacana, which I have to say I love Tokyo
Mm,
Bacana. So delicious.
that's nice to
But some
hear.
questions about like how can you deal with flea beetles? Is it susceptible to cabbage moths? So maybe some pest control advice for that one.
Yeah. Because yes and yes is the answer there. Flea beetles and cabbage moths do like this crop as well, unfortunately. So for me, part of the key is growing it out of that normal season. So if I'm growing it in a cold frame or a greenhouse for winter harvesting, the good news is that I don't have flea beetles or cabbage moths during the winter months. And to get it to that stage, I am using things like lightweight row covers, some agribond covers to help prevent. So I'm starting with crop rotation, obviously planting brassica family crops in a different spot every time I plant them, rotating my crops in a 3 to 4 year cycle. And then as soon as I plant those seeds or seedlings, I'm covering them with row cover so those little moths can't come and lay their eggs or the flea beetles can't find them, and then, leave enough slack that they can grow underneath it. And then you can leave those covers on the entire time, or you can take them off once they reach a size that you're pretty much ready to harvest them at. So that's really up to you whether you want a baby crop or a mature crop. But yes, unfortunately, as a cabbage family member, they are prone to the same problems.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, for mash, questions again on the
Mm.
flavor. Maybe how does it compare to spinach? And then also we saw
Yeah.
that it's very cold tolerant. In your garden, is it also heat tolerant on the other end of the spectrum?
It is. I don't think it's sort of like the cockroach of the vegetable family, I think, at this point. I don't think there's much that could, deter mosh from growing, really. It just goes and goes. So yeah, even in summer, like it's popping up in the garden. The ones that have receded are popping up and I still harvest it. I wouldn't say it's like incredibly heat tolerant. Its season really shines during the cold season for sure. But as to flavor, the flavor isn't exactly that one is I compare more to lettuce and spinach, for example. So for me, it's a very mild, like almost a bit of a nutty flavor, very mildly nutty. But you can treat it very much like you would lettuce in a salad or a sandwich, things like that as well. And it's just delicious. And I love the texture of it. The leaves are, a little bit thicker than lettuce would be. And I love the fact it grows in this little rosette, which you kind of like spear whole and eat whole. It's just a really delicious vegetable to grow.
Great, thank you. I'm going to skip on down to tomatillas. We had some questions about tomatillas. You had
Yeah.
mentioned you should have a couple of plants for pollination, and there were a few people asking, do they need to be two different varieties of tomatillos, or can it just be two different plants of the same variety?
It can just be 2 different plants of the same variety. There's been many, many years I've just honestly grown just a regular green variety with excellent success, but it does just have to be at least 2 plants. Yeah, one is just not gonna cut it for that plant. Ground cherries, of course, though, as I mentioned, can deal with one. But it's also fun to grow different tomatillos, so I do like to grow, purple and green and yellow ones in my garden, at the same times because it really the yellow ones are sweeter and they're really nice for, like, a fresh salsa. like on top of tacos and things like that. Whereas the purple and the green ones, I really love to roast and make salsa verde. So there's quite a bit you can do with all the different types of tomatillos.
Nice. And I think you mentioned
Yeah.
that you start them along with your tomatoes. So do you recommend
Yes.
transplanting them just along the same schedule as tomatoes?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I treat them exactly like tomatoes that way. And same with ground cherries, really starting them about the same time inside, mid-March to late March, and then transplanting them into the garden once the risk of frost has passed. Because like tomatoes, they're all very tender. So you definitely don't want to put them in the garden while there's still that risk of cold temperatures.
Great. And then there was a question sort of just asking like what is the harvest level? I mean, how do they compare maybe to a tomato in terms of yield per
Hmm.
plant?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. And that's going to depend a lot, of course, on your growing conditions and the sun that they're getting and the fertility of your soil, of course. But assuming that, all things are equal and you've got a nice fertile spot there, I haven't actually weighed every tomatillo per plant, but I can tell you right now that I wish they'd quit. Okay. They're that productive at this point in the season that I'm like, okay, once the frost comes, I'm not going to miss them. I've got so much salsa verde in my freezer. I'm done with them. But yeah, they're quite productive, but there's different, of course, varieties, and some are more productive than others. Some are earlier, some are more compact, some are taller. So it's really going to depend on variety as well. I would say it would be similar to a determinate tomato, a bush type tomato, where they both are very similar in size, and that tomatillos grow 3 to 4 feet tall. So that's how I would compare it. So although, unlike a bush tomato, a determinate tomato that produces its crop generally within a certain window, tomatillos keep on going. Like there's a whole bunch up there in the plant now that are totally empty, papery husks that have no chance of those fruits filling out. So they will continue until frost kills them, unlike determinate tomatoes.
Okay, super.
Yeah,
We're a little bit past 5. I think maybe we could squeeze in a couple more questions and then we'll
sure.
wrap it up. I did have several people ask, you had a few tomato selections in this presentation. We had
Yeah.
had a few people ask if you have a low acid tomato that you like, something that doesn't cut the tongue quite as much.
Yeah, I mean, my gosh, there's so many, so many tomatoes. I mean, and so many types. I mean, I love cherry tomatoes are generally very sweet. If people don't like a lot of acid in their tomatoes, like Sun Gold, incredibly sweet. Such a great variety, and Jasper, another outstanding variety that's super disease tolerant as well, particularly to like late blight, which is one of the reasons I grow it every single year. In terms of slicing tomato, I find Galahad isn't super acidic. I like that one a lot for pretty much anything you'd use a tomato for, as well as many of the heirlooms too, like Captain Lucky. Not overly acidic, more sweet. Pineapple is certainly very sweet. Great variety that's very sweet. Yeah, so many tomatoes, out there. Just I'd read the descriptions carefully in the seed catalog. And if you're really not sure, my goodness, email Johnny's and ask their recommendations as well.
Excellent. That's right. Okay, so a question about Komatsuna. Is it a brassica and is it, susceptible to brassica pests, etc.?
Yes.
Yep.
I
Okay.
mean, I could go on with that, but yeah, I mean, basically, like Toki Bacana, it is. So
Yeah.
again, crop rotation, using row covers if you need to. Now, in those photos that I showed, if you look really closely, you might see a little hole or two because I wasn't using row covers when I did those pictures. But I certainly I think lately in the past year or two, I have more cabbage moths than I have in the past. So I've been using covers religiously, and it's worked very well for me with them.
Excellent. Maybe we could
Yeah.
close with there were several people asking, do you have any recipes that you can share? So I don't know if you have anything in either your website or your books that you want to mention, but I think a lot of people thought some of that stuff looked pretty good that you were sharing.
you know oh my goodness, I wanted to include recipes in my books and I was shut down from doing that. I was told no, because especially with Veggie Garden Remix, I thought it'd be fun to share some of the family recipes, but no, unfortunately I didn't. I'm sorry, I don't really. I'm funnily enough, I'm working on a recipe book, like a family recipe book for all my kids and nephews and nieces for Christmas, but I haven't actually. I'll have to share some on social media, maybe some of those recipes on my Facebook and such. So I would say stay tuned to my Facebook, and I will share some of those when I'm finally finished it. But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't. I wanted to, but I wasn't able to.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for all of your questions. I know there were more questions than we can answer in an hour, but hopefully we got to a fair number of them. And thank you, Nikki, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you, Liv. I really appreciate you moderating and going through all those questions. It's a lot of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Liv. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, lots and lots of questions were pouring through the entire time. And thank you, Nikki, for this presentation and sharing these crops and inspiring us to shake up our vegetable gardens a little bit next year. Um, and
Oh,
as Liv was saying, we appreciate the questions, everyone. And we're sorry we couldn't get to them all in the time that we had. We do encourage you to check out the varieties that you saw in Nikki's slides today or tomorrow at johnnyseeds.com. And if you have questions about these, or any other products we offer, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can contact us via live chat, email, or by phone, and our growing experts will be happy to help you. Additionally, we invite you to explore savvygardening.com to find online courses, growing advice, and more from Nikki and her fellow gardening gurus. And we had some questions about this. Please note you will receive an email with a link to this event's webpage. A recording of this presentation, along with today's slides and additional resources, will be posted there on Saturday, October 21st. And finally, we're going to draw names for our giveaway tomorrow morning, and we will notify the winners via email. So, again, good luck, everyone. And
good
so,
luck.
finally, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. We look forward to having you join us in November when we'll share a selection of our exciting new products for 2024. And until that time, best
Mm.
wishes from the employee owners at Johnny's, and thank you.